and where you're from, that'd be great. So Goa, do you want to kick us off?
Sure, yeah. Hi Rob, hi everyone. Hopefully it'll be a really interesting discussion. So my name's Guy Mohammed. I'm the Group Head of Information Security at L&Q. Yeah, looking forward to the discussion, and always thrown a bit of a security angle to these discussions. So yeah. Hey.
Matt.
Morning everyone, my name's Matthew Wallbridge. I'm the Chief Digital and Information Officer for the London Borough of Hillingdon, and I'll say cybersecurity is ever at the top table for every organisation at the moment, and this brings it into a lot of perspective about, again, our reliance on technology, but also what as strategic leaders we can do to mitigate some of those, and actually to think about not just the technology but the culture in the organisations.
Thanks, Matt. Dave.
Good morning, David Maskell, Head of IT and Information Security at Thatcham Research. Yeah, very much looking forward to the conversation. I think business resilience is key and a hot topic at the moment, and that's understandable, and looking forward to what we find out.
And thank you. And last but not least, Ken. Hi.
Hi there. I am Ken Dickey. I'm the CIO for Leithway Executive Search, and seconding all the points that we've raised here, I'm very conscious and keen to discuss the whole approach to that business continuity and business resilience, and understanding that leadership perspective, and how we can actually make sure that people understand the challenges we face with what is normally considered a robust system. So it'll be an interesting talk.
Brilliant, thank you. So yeah, I guess before we kick off, it's worth, and it's the summer feels like a long time ago now with the cold and wet weather we've had the last week, but 19th of July, was a day that I remember getting a phone call very early in the morning, because so many of our customers were impacted. Now we're not actually a CrowdStrike reseller, but a lot of our customers do use CrowdStrike. Some of the rest of our panel that aren't on the call today had it as well. But it was really hard to believe actually that what you would see as quite a small update, right? This was a sensor update. This wasn't a major product release or those kind of things, actually caused such a major issue. Something causing an out of bound memory error across Windows servers, Windows devices, everywhere. I mean, 8.5 million devices they reckon were affected, but I think the number's actually higher. That's just obviously what was recorded. But some of the impacts are just, when we think back, are just incredible. Over 3,000 flights cancelled, 11,000 delayed, health services impacted by just multiple different systems and things that were impacted. Banking were affected. My local bank, you couldn't get onto their website, you couldn't do any online banking, which today we don't have any banks now high street anymore. So that's a massive impact for people. And of course, across retail, broadcasting, BBC, Sky, they were all impacted by these things, and they're just the ones that kind of hit the news. Estimated financial damage, $10 billion, I think was the number that I saw. I'm sure there's numbers that are higher and lower than those things. So it was quite incredible. And I think what was more incredible was to see, if you watch the Sky News tickers and things and the BBC News tickers, it was incredible just to see how this news obviously dominated, but just the frequency of the updates was almost kind of 30-60 seconds worth of updates of things that were going on. Once people kind of realized what the issue was, there was of course a lot of false news being posted. Everyone became an expert overnight on these things, me included. I was blogging about this stuff as well, but it was literally something that affected everybody. We had volunteers inside Cisilion, so people that don't do IT roles that were going to some of our managed service customers and helping them, restart devices and go through some of the recovery things and try some of the patches out that people were doing. So it really was quite incredible. So today, look, what we're going to talk about today, we're going to go through some of this with the panel in a minute and understand, what were our kind of thoughts on those things, were we impacted? And then really this is about some of the lessons that we learned. So, and I think there's lessons to be learned all the way through. So from what we do as IT, and some of the choices that we make in technologies, but also what can we do in the world that we're in today, where we're predominantly cloud or at least hybrid cloud. We're relying on third parties for software that we just feel we need to trust these people, right? But also then what we can learn internally around the way that we run disaster recovery that we have a plan for things like this. Where does this fit into our plan? If it didn't fit into the plan, then it probably does today. So that's enough of my rambling. I'm already losing my voice from rambling on. So thanks. So Ken, I know we were chatting just before we went live, but did you want to share your kind of thoughts on what happened and what we can do?
So yeah, sure. I'm going to come to this from a very positive space, in the fact that we were unaffected by the Crowdstrike incident. But what we did invoke was, we engaged our incident management. We're ISO 27001. We have a structure designed to approach each event like this from a business continuity, business resilience, depending on what you want to call it, disaster recovery. I mean, people have different terms and adopt different terminology for much the same thing, which was continuing to provide services to our clients. And what was really interesting was the lack of comprehension of what was going on. Yeah. The idea that the technology was breaking and surely we can just fix it. And why aren't people just on top of this? And the scale of how a singular product could take out such a huge swathe of industries, healthcare, etc., and as you called out. And I think what was quite fascinating was the disconnect between, certainly internally, my leadership's understanding of what was going on with the technology and our reliance on it, and actually, even from the fortunate position we were in, how little control we had over the actual fix. And I think this is an interesting piece. I know the rest of the kind of the group will come at it from different perspectives depending on their experiences, but for me it was a really quite insightful piece around how technology, to my leadership team, is just a utility that always works, and to see it fail on a global scale like this was a bit of a revelation. And managing that, even though I've got a great rapport with my leadership team, there is an understanding we're a technology-led business, there's still those gaps in that understanding. And I think this has helped focus the mind a little bit, but then people have short memories, so they will forget quite quickly. I think it also kind of brought to the surface how important having things like business continuity plans, even if you aren't affected, using them, testing them, checking that they work, the right notifications to go out, being ready for the challenges, having everybody engaged, and then actually having a subsequent post-mortem, how do we manage to kind of dodge that bullet? So I come from this from a very different perspective, and I'm sure those that have been affected by the situation will come at it in a much harder way. But for me, it was very much that leadership piece, and then actually kind of the other part that you mentioned there, which was how did we dodge that bullet, and understanding how our approach to what we take from our vendors, how reliant we are on one thing versus another, and understanding our infrastructure. I'm very fortunate I come from an environment where it's relatively simple because we're a smaller organization, so I do understand in larger organizations the complexity compounds matters massively, but at the same time how some of those decisions about understanding where we were exposed, we had multi-tier levels of security, we had multi-tiered versions of our cloud access and all manner of other different sort of models that we adopt, and how that had provided the overall resilience to our environment that it allowed us to kind of, when I say that we weren't affected, we saw degradation in some of the services, but we never lost a service. So, and again, the incident management process allowed us to make sure that we're ready should something all of a sudden become catastrophic. We were in a position to kind of deal with it. And I'd be really interested to hear what the rest of the team kind of talk to when they talk about maybe if they were impacted, how their services were impacted and how the management responded to that, because I'm quite curious to see. I could kind of guess how my rest of my leadership team would have behaved if we'd had a full-on outage. So I think that's the piece that I come to that from.
Totally, and I think you're right. I think even though and that's the first question, where obviously were you impacted by the Crowdstrike, but regardless, right, the outage that occurred, could have been, it was unfortunate, right, obviously, but it could have been any XDR provider, right, that could have the same thing could have happened. So I think your point about being prepared for these things is absolutely vital. Who wants to I know you've all got an opinion on this. Who wants to go next? I'm gonna go, Matt.
Yeah, I think Ken makes a really good point about preparedness. I mean, like with most things, you can control the controllables. Very little you could have done around the Crowdstrike issue, but as organisations, it helps you to understand the importance and to understand what you need to do to prepare. So I'd talk about what we're doing in London Borough of Hillingdon is, so we actually already had plans. This is slightly thinking ahead, so it's a bit fortuitous, is we've got a National Cyber Security Centre exercise. So we've got a cyber related day that we're going to deal with an incident so we can understand our preparedness. And actually, because I work in the public sector in local government, and there's an organisation called the Local Government Association, we're actually doing a cyber 360. So that's a 360 of our entire organisation over a period of week, and that's looking at both the technology, that's looking at the people, and that has sessions with right from the chief exec to the leader of the council to the various services. It goes right from top to bottom, and I think really importantly, as it's ever an issue, it's the stuff that you don't see. I think you obviously Crowdstrike made the press because it was more public facing, it affected more people, but there are similar smaller scale issues that sit across all sectors all the time, every day. The stuff that you don't see, some you do see, is understanding how we do better at this, because it's going to get worse before it gets better, in my humble opinion. That we're going to see more of this, and as we said at the start, with the ever reliance on technology running our business, is the inherent risk from a business continuity perspective across all of our organisations is we do need to be prepared. My personal view is it's less about the technology, it's more about people. It's about people's mistakes and how you run an organisation of 3,000 people is you're only as weak as your person that doesn't understand it and that makes and clicks the wrong button. So understanding how you do the learning and development piece, how you get it up in the top of the organisation to understand the importance, and how do you put your perimeter and your safety mechanisms around it is ever more important. So it's more of a people issue than a technology issue in my view. So and organisations, with budget cuts, particularly in the public sector, cut learning and development out of their budget. So it's again the thing that we need to focus on more as an organisation. But I'm really looking forward to the next 2 months as it goes. I expect I'll find out things that I don't like and that we could do better. But I'd rather know than not know, and I think that's the importance of what we're doing at the moment.
Yeah, really, really insightful. I think you're right. I think like many things, right, is people, and to use a personal analogy, which was quite amusing. We do rely, as you say, so much on technology. And my son on Saturday afternoon decided he wanted a cup of coffee. He's only 7. He had decaf. Don't worry, he had decaf. He managed to spill it over the table in the lounge. The router's behind, so it soaked our router. So of course, for the whole of Saturday afternoon and most of Sunday until I could get one delivered on Amazon, we had no internet. And it's incredible. Like we went out. It's great, but that reliance is so. And I sort of joke about it because it got the kids out, but we absolutely do rely on these things, right? And we think about resiliency for internet and LAN and those kind of things. And when we used to have data centers, we used to have, some of us still do, but we had as many redundancies as we can. But to the point we raised earlier, so much reliance on things that are out of our control sometimes. And yeah, go.
Yeah, I was actually going to say, you just made me think. So, do you now have a resilience plan for that incident that you had with your router at home?
I do. I've got my own feed into the office now.
No, but it's a really interesting point, Rob, that you kind of made, which is the thing is, we could have anticipated, or we could try to anticipate these things, and I think we absolutely can put resilience around these things, but it comes at a cost. Now, is that an appetite? And I think the opportunity from the incident, so just going back to your original question, was we affected? We weren't, for the most part. We had a couple of vendors on our supply chain that were impacted, which degraded the service, so our ITSM was impacted. So it meant that our service desk couldn't take log requests as they normally would. They had to go to an Excel spreadsheet and log it in that way as a temporary measure, because it's just one of those things. But it brings to point, which I think Matthew and Ken alluded to, which is that reliance. It's always a technology problem, but actually it's a wider business problem. It's a continuity issue that's often overlooked. So it's actually created conversations that wouldn't either happen or they happen rarely. So, oh, you know, we need to spend more time, effort, money, resources on making sure we've got resilience on this technology. Please, can we have more money or whatever it is? And then it's like, oh yeah, but that's never really happened, or that only happened like once in the last 5 years. So do we need to spend that money? All of a sudden, this opportunity, because it's such a global or such a widespread event, you've got execs asking questions like, oh, what do we do? And that's the opportunity we have to bring that to the table. So, well, we can do these things, but how important is that thing? However, you know, some people are down for a day, some people are down for a few days. What's your continuity plan? Are you going to go to pen and paper? Are you going to use people's personal devices or mobile phones to continue work? And these are the real questions that happen, because I think everyone has this fantastic aspiration, which is, yeah, we need resilience and we need to make sure our business is up 100% of the time. When the numbers start coming into play, you know, it's going to cost you, you know, 5 million or 2 million or 1 million to provide resilience on this thing. Then you have a quantification around risk that happens, that the business then says, well, actually, are we happy to, you know, are we willing to accept the risk, or do we want to spend that money? And then that's when the right conversations happen. So for us, the opportunity from an unfortunate situation, which could have happened to anyone and any vendor, actually becomes a lot more mature and grown up, which is, well, should we do anything about this? Do we need to do anything about this? But ultimately, what is most important for us as a business, and how do we continue that, you know, doing our job and servicing our, you know, for us, our residents, but for our customers and our clients, how do we give them that reassurance? And it's led to, you know, conversations where we're having these conversations. And now, to Matthew's point, we're going to be picking up the conversation. Tell us your most valuable assets. What do you prize the most in the organization? Not what you think, but what actually that means. And then we will make sure we put the right resilience around it that you're happy with.
Yeah, I think, and Dave, I'll come to you in a sec as well. And I think just to recap on what you said, I think, you know, it's, you know, we've not really seen anything like this, right, before. And I think with every major outage, and it's, you know, there are always lessons, right? There are lessons that will be learned from organizations that either were impacted or could have been impacted, as we said before, right? This could have been another vendor that more people would have been affected for that were on this call. You know, whether it's an internet outage in the day, it's like every outage, you know, has a positive side of actually making us more resilient and making us more aware into the future. But I think that point is really valid, of just thinking about, you know, where are those most critical assets? And I think depending on the industry you work in, those things shift, right? Obviously, you know, health services and things is about keeping people alive, right? And, you know, versus can people interact and communicate? So I think absolutely valid. Dave, I've had your hand up for a while, sorry.
Yeah, no problem at all. I think there's been a lot of good discussions here, and I think, like Ken, I 27001, so we carried out the incident review, and that's always good to do. We were not impacted. We had a few minor supplier impacts, so the impact of action was very minimal. But what it did do for me was that it was probably the first time since we've all moved to this outsourced sort of software as a service model where something big happened that we couldn't control. So historically, as you said, we had lease lines, we had multiple exchange servers, we all managed that ourselves, and we would take it and we would have a team of people that would react to an event like this and change connections, route different directions, do all those sort of things that we did for high availability and resilience. But this time it was probably pretty much outside our control. And although it could have affected any XDR, is there another software as a service? If this had been M365, if this had been another core software as a service provider with this impact, just what the impact of the business would be for that. So the old school approach would be very much assume that IT can fix it. IT will come up with some magic and do something and pull some wires together and make it happen. But actually, a lot of this now with software as a service and more globalization is outside of control. So we need to think at a slightly different level than ever before.
Yeah, very good point. And Matt, sorry, you just raised a really good question in the chat. If anyone that voted on the poll about whether you're affected or not would happily share the impact or anything that happened to you, please do feel free to stick your hand up. We'd love to hear from you if you're open to sharing on the call. while we wait for that, I guess that another area to talk about is Microsoft's role in all this, right? So it was an interesting one when it happened, because I think initially, if you look back at all the, I was looking back over all the tweets and stuff that kind of, or the X's, whatever we're supposed to call it now, that happened over the day this morning, and it was very evident early on that this is a Microsoft thing, right, that's caused this. And then it was obviously, it came out kind of actually what the issue was. But I think one of the questions that has been raised a lot, of course, is could Microsoft have done more? And we're using Microsoft in this example because it was Windows that was impacted by this. But what's our thought on that, team? Is there more that Microsoft could have done? Do you think they did enough? Do you think there'll be changes at play to minimize this in the future? Ken?
Yeah, I actually genuinely do think they could have done more. I am having worked in software development, worked in organizations, managed release trains and everything else that goes with it. It is astounding to me that what if it is true, and I am cynical. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I'm not sure we have ever been told the full story. And whether you go down it was an intern with some random code getting that out somehow or other, to it was a genuine accident and it was a problem that wasn't picked up. I still to this day find it very hard to believe that we couldn't have done something more, and that shouldn't have happened. And Microsoft's reliance on or how these services can impact on Microsoft should be doing more to protect themselves. And David made a really good point with the never-ending move to software as a service and platform as a service and everything as a service. Our reliance on these organizations, they become single points of failure. Microsoft is a single point of failure. And look, again, my understanding of events, there is you can kind of do some root cause analysis on this. Microsoft, at the end of the day, went through the equivalent of the Monopolies Commission with the EU, had to open up their kernel, and therefore, through no choice of their own, had their kernel exposed to these kind of failures that the likes of Apple, who haven't had to do that, don't have to experience. So you understanding the technicalities behind the scenes is also a challenge. And so Microsoft maybe cannot fix for this because they're never going to be able to protect, to Goa's point, there is an equation going on. What is the risk versus what is the cost? And there's a product at the end of it. And Microsoft have to do that same equation as everybody else does. And they've got to make it viable as a business. I just think that, when we outsource our services to these vendors, we are actually exposing ourselves to more risk, and therefore those vendors have to be upping their game, and it is a constant chasing your tail. But as we become really, really consolidated to core products, those core products become even more material in their defenses and how they actually can impact the world. I mean, this is, I know it sounds really kind of sort of an elaborate discussion, but if Microsoft goes down, the world stops, right? Yep. And we saw it. Operations don't happen, airplanes don't fly. The world stops, and that wasn't the case. And again, as David said, if my Exchange server broke, I was fixing it. That's it. It's like it didn't affect anybody else. And I don't know if people truly understand where we've got to. And again, there's lots of this. It boils down to money. How do I mitigate for that? How do I mitigate for Microsoft? I can't, can I? I mean, this is one thing about saying you use the example of your router goes down and you maybe drop to a mobile device and you can use 5G or whatever, or your neighbor's Wi-Fi if you know the password. But I can't replace Microsoft. No. I mean, what do I do? And we've got ourselves into this kind of cul-de-sac where it's actually impossible to back out. And I think, again, it's that understanding of where we're at, which is a challenge. I mean, it really is. And some things you just can't mitigate for, I guess, is probably the place to recognise.
Yeah, that's a really good shout. Go, I know you've got a good view on this as well.
Well, I don't know if it's a good view, but this is my view. I appreciate the preemptiveness. So I think I'm going to come at this a slightly different angle. I do agree with Ken that can we mitigate for that? it's a difficult one. Could Microsoft done more? Potentially. I mean, there's a lot of speculation around what exactly happened. I feel sorry for the poor intern. I don't know who this intern is that always gets blamed for everything, but there's obviously an intern in all these organizations. But I think there was a lot of kind of speculation on whose fault it was. And I remember waking up actually on the day where this was going on. I was reading on Twitter and X now, sorry, not Twitter. The thing is, I was reading and I was like, oh, 1 minute, it's because of a restart. It was coming in blue screen. And I remember literally on that morning, I just started my machine, or I just come out standby, and it was asking me to restart. And I'm like, oh, I don't want to restart. Reaching out to our tech team and saying, look, we've got this thing going on. We might want to stop a forced update or whatever it is. Might be an issue. And we're unsure. I think for me, I've been doing I do a lot around psychology and what I do, and just generally, and actually a lot of it's managing expectations. So there was this frustration where Crowdstrike are blaming Microsoft blamed Crowdstrike, and there was all this kind of other thing that was happening. I think, going back to the original point, technology is really reliable now, so it's a victim of its own success. So when it stops working, we're like, oh, what do we do? My gosh, I can't get online. Actually, it's about managing expectations and getting that message out, saying, look, this is what we can do, we're working on it, we're really sorry. There is that, almost things become a little less painful and a little less worrisome for people, for organizations and individuals, when you know what's going on. So first of all, it's almost that, right, it's not a you problem, it's an us problem when we're looking into it. All of a sudden you sort of calm down a little bit. I remember working for a small organization where it's a strange phenomenon, and this was we would have a fiber coming into our building, small organization, all local infrastructure. The internet line would go down and everyone's like panicking, can't email, can't do this, can't do that, can't do all of this stuff. And you tell them, oh, someone's just cut through a line on the road, there's nothing we can do, we just got no internet. So they either go and find a cafe somewhere, or they start talking to each other. So the thing is, depending on your business and what you need to get done, you have these interesting things happen, but when you manage expectations, all of a sudden the outcomes become a bit more positive, and you start looking at the right things, and you stop panicking. People stop panicking. You start becoming a bit more proactive on what do we need to get the job done. Do I pick up the phone? Do I get online? So I think it's, whether Microsoft could have done more or not, I think perhaps they could have done more, but it might have been around communications and that openness. It could have, same with Crowdstrike. It's not, it's their fault. Go and speak to them and get your lawyers onto that group of people. It's more about, right, this is how we mitigate the issue. We're working with you, and we'll get to a good place as soon as possible. By the way, this is where we're at, and we can do with some help. And I think that would have definitely softened the impact a little bit.
Yeah, and I think certainly from some of the things I saw, and I have monthly calls with some of the product engineering groups in that look after Windows, and it was quite interesting actually. I think how I was quite pleasantly pleased. Maybe not right at the beginning. I think it was a little bit of it ain't me, mate type thing. But I think definitely after the sort of the first hour had kind of passed, there was a real. I know a lot of people work in Microsoft, and the same. A lot of them were taken off of their day job to go and you need to go and fix this. And I think whether that was purely down to the reputational damage that it's going to do to them, regardless, right? It's their product, it's their operating system, it's their system that was impacted, regardless of what the root cause was. You have to kind of ask, is that the main reason why? But it was really interesting to see, I guess, it's a weird world Microsoft have, isn't it? Because they compete in this space, right? They've got their own XDR platforms and things, and so they are competitors of CrowdStrike. Yet they rely on their vendor ecosystem so heavily as partners, right? You look at the how they compete in the Surface world with Dell and HP and everything else, right? They are OEM partners. They are also compete. So I think they have got that. They have got to play properly. They have got to work with them as partners. They have got to work with them as equals. And I think towards the latter part, certainly, it did feel like they really were working on it together. And I think there will be, there certainly will be changes. I've seen, I've seen some things that are being discussed. I don't know how many of these are public, so I'll fish out the ones that I know I can share, and I'll share them. But there is definitely going to be some changes that will be being made to the way in which kernel access is made. I think Ken, as you raised earlier on, Microsoft don't have a choice at the moment. They have to give access to the kernel code against anti-monopolies and compete, so they have to do it. But it shows the danger, right? I mean, they could make the same mistake, right? They own the kernel, they own the OS, but I think this working together thing is really important, and I wonder whether this is something that will drive, most of us as in IT use multiple different vendors, multiple different technologies, and I think one of the things we're certainly doing internally is having a look at the relationships between those vendors. How well do they work with each other, versus just go, well, it's not my product, mate. You need to pass that one off. And I think there are vendors that work really, really well together in isolated scenarios, but it'd be very interesting to see whether this is something that changes us. It's affected enough people, I think, for people to stick their head up and go, hold on a minute, how's that going to affect us? Because we're right, we're not necessarily in control of what those vendors do. We can mitigate to an extent, I think, but where there are multiple parties involved or that have a role to play, how they work together is so fundamental, and certainly going to make a difference to some of the technology choices that we make. So I guess as we kind of get to wrap to a close, it's worth thinking about, what are those things that we're doing, right? And unfortunately, Aidan couldn't join us today, but I know they were impacted quite heavily, and he won't mind me saying this, but he shared with us actually before the call just some of the things that they are doing in their disaster recovery planning. I'm sure, Matt, you've talked about some of the things that are going on within Hillingdon at the moment, but I think they absolutely are. I think we've had a look through our DR recovery, and actually these are areas that we don't specifically cover off. We think about outages, we cover things like servers and cloud outages and loss of service and people and buildings and those things, but we've not got anything specific that talks about device recovery in these kind of situations. And it's made us really think about does everyone know how to recover? Have we run this as a simulation in the past? Have we not going to simulate a dodgy agent on a device, but actually that process is quite easy to operate, and what could we do? Could we support, and how would we support bring your own device? One of the things that we've looked at doing internally now, which we already do for a lot of the contractors that we work with, is using things like Cloud PC. And not to say they won't be impacted, but it's another level that we can look at to go, actually, how quickly can we spin new devices up using AVD or Windows 365 or whatever it might be, so that actually we can get some people back and functioning. And these are things that we've never really used as a use case for that before. We've more used it as ease of deploying technology. So I think it'd be interesting just to hear from you, team, what your anything you have put in place at the moment to help further test or mitigate, or what you're planning to do. Go.
Yeah, I was going to say we haven't put anything in place, but this is something we've been discussing for a while. So I think it's quite a difficult conversation to what can we do. I think one of the things we've been looking at and toying with the idea, and we're kind of toying with the idea and sort of putting it on the table, is multi-cloud. Is definitely something that needs to be thought about. I think it needs to be a decision that needs to be made whether you do or not. It's like, oh yeah, multi-cloud, but then it's more complexity, and it's there's different environments to manage. But if your services are so critical that you absolutely have to have them, multi-cloud is definitely something to think about with edge computing. So having it on secure edge. So what then you have is you don't have reliance on trusted devices. You rely on your edge, and then you can come in. So the reality is, if you've got 8.5 million devices that are dead, for a lack of a better term, as a result of an outage, you need to get some devices from somewhere, and everyone's going to go to the same suppliers. So what you're going to do is you're probably going to ask your staff to either use their own, which can mitigate the risk through edge computing, so you're not relying on the trusted device, or you say, right, we're going to give you £500, go and buy it from the local PC World or whatever it is, and you can still get online and do whatever you need to do, or you use your mobile. So I think that's a very real conversation that needs to be had and discussed and said, right, we make a decision on it. The outside of edge, well, outside of cloud, you've also got, maybe you want your own tenancy locally. Maybe you want to go back to a local data center for those core assets. It's a really weird thing to say, but actually, if it's that important, and you know, you can spin up some servers to keep a few things moving along, it may be an option. You know, but I think it's very tricky to mitigate against every scenario, such as something like this. You know, if we had a bad Windows update, most people use Windows. You're not going to go to everyone and say, right, no, we've got some Macs, right, available. You know, if there was a bad Windows update that bricked everything, you know, I think we've got bigger problems at that point. So yeah, it's about managing what are we able to do, and then at that point, if we've got all the Windows devices down, probably the people we're working with are probably going to be down, and it's a much wider conversation mobile. So that's the take, but that's what we're looking at and approaching. So we are looking at, we're exploring the fact that we are a big Microsoft house, and do we want to stay full Microsoft for everything? Again, it's a conversation, not making any strategic decisions right now, but these are things that need to be discussed and agreed.
I think it's back to the point at the beginning, isn't it, about, you know, every mitigation costs, right? And it is about understanding the risk and the financial impact of the risk, and the not just the financials, but obviously, you know, when we are talking about life and death, as we are in some of these situations, let's be clear. It's a hard one, isn't it? Because like you say, you know, back to that point at the beginning is like, you know, you can't, you know, can you really mitigate against everything? You know, every mitigation you do has a price. It's a risk, you know, risk versus stability type conversation. There's a limit, right, as to how much. Again, we talk about at the beginning about, you know, how well the rest of the organization understands these things, and the reliance, not, you know, IT is just that thing that's there now, isn't it? It's just there, you know. It's we expect it to work, we expect the internet to work, you know, you expect your Netflix to work and all these kind of things. It never doesn't, you know, it's just there. And I think, as you say, it's a real tough one, you know, but certainly one I think that's being discussed. Anyone else? Ken, Matt, any other thoughts?
Yeah. So I think a slightly different angle is, you're right about how do you mitigate risks, and you're right, everything has a cost, right? We could all spend more on all of this kind of stuff if we had bottomless pits of money to have a Rolls Royce approaching what we do. But I think one of the areas that I've been thinking about, and I don't have all the answers at the moment, is about the supply chain risks that we have as organisations at the moment. So you've seen kind of attacks on NRS, Mediquip, so how do we understand when we're both procuring services and understanding what's down the supply chain? Because control the controllables, right? We can understand the cyber risks of the things that we're directly procuring, although we could do much better at understanding those. But what's down the supply chain of some of those things we're procuring? So some of the indirect consequences, and I think that's going to become more important again over the next couple of years, because it's the things that you can't see and that you don't understand, and therefore, if anything happens, it's more difficult to mitigate some of those risks. So we're doing some work to better understand what's down the supply chain at the moment, and what are the risks. But going back to it, what are the financial risks in those procurements of those suppliers, because they've got that supply chain? Because in the end, it's a cost of money. It's a financial risk, cyber, but it's also a business continuity, which is about money in the end. But it's also a kind of PTSD in an organisation. It does change the culture of organisations when you have a cyber attack as well. So it's kind of multifaceted. So how you can put some better controls around those supply chains risks are one area that I'm looking at.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think supply chain. I mean, certainly, you know, we're looking at supply chain from a cyber attack perspective, right? And, you know, making sure that everyone we work with, we've done this for a while, of course, but making sure that everyone we work with adheres to, you know, relevant, Cyber Security Plus and ISOs, and those things. And actually, we've seen more, even in tender responses, that obviously we work on lots of tenders and stuff as an organisation. Even a lot of the questions around those things now are being a lot more verbose in the information that they're asking and the proof they're asking around to actually demonstrate that you are a pivotal point of that supply chain for them, and therefore how are you going to not expose them or put them into risk. Ken, do you want to close us off? Oh, you're muted, Ken.
I thought I pressed the keyboard. There we go. Actually, just 2 bits, and then obviously kind of, I won't waffle on, but I think there is a real piece here where we are talking, and it with that what Matthew was talking to, that supply chain piece, and actually my organisation is part of that supply chain. So kind of calling on what you're talking about there, Rob, which is actually our clients looking at us. Whereas in the past we would historically answer a questionnaire, you provide some evidence, our certificates for ISO, etc. We now go through audit processes like we've never been through, and it is incredibly thorough. Most recently, one asking me questions around what we do to protect against the invention of quantum computing, and I am not exaggerating. That was in the questionnaire and then picked up in an audit after the fact. And I know that's humorous, but it is where people are now starting to try and qualify and quantify what is the risk exposure of the supply chain, because we have outsourced all of this. I now look at this with my suppliers and go, what is the risk that you present to my business? Is it existential? Can we survive? And then circling back to the conversation earlier, I can't answer that question. I mean, like Microsoft actually, fun enough, does fit into our CyberGRX piece and does answer the surveys, but I can't do anything about it. I mean, if they come back and they don't answer the question in a suitable fashion, I can't get rid of them. No. And as Goa said, if they launch a Windows update that wipes out all of the Windows devices in the world, we're all going to be in the same boat. People with Macs will be laughing, obviously, but they won't be able to talk to anybody. I mean, we're in this really kind of weird space where it's about risk mitigation, it's risk management, it's understanding that balance between what it costs versus what the return on that investment is. And at the same time, like we're executive search, we work with very, very valuable and sensitive data. We need to guarantee that we're doing the absolute best we can to protect the information that we have. And so we are always going to be looking to get the best security, because we can't afford to take any risk. And like, there is no negotiation on that. Other organizations can take a different approach. I'm not saying they sell close to the wind or anything, but they can understand their value proposition from a different perspective. But as we outsource all of this to other people, and we're kind of in this state of flux where, a bit like insurance, you don't realize you need it until you actually need it.
Yes.
And there is a case for trying to become a better understanding of what you've exposed yourself to. And I think that's Crowdstrike focused the mind of a lot of C-suite individuals, tech managers, everybody, cybersecurity. Oh my word, have we dropped the ball? I don't think we had, but oh look, this is what the technology has now led us down in a pathway. And I think that's a really interesting challenge for the next couple of years, as it stays in people's memories of, wow, we were exposed there. How do we mitigate for that? So I could talk about multi-cloud, because I actually believe in multi-cloud, but I'm not going to go down that because that's another conversation altogether.
that might be next time. That's a good one. And Dave, I think I'm going to squeeze you in. Go on, Dave.
Yeah. Just one quick last point, really, and credit goes to Aidan for this, because he did highlight it. But I think it's a key point. When the worst happens, and the worst will happen at some point, we will see something similar. That we all have responsibility to look after our team. So in Aidan's case, I know he had a big team and looking after that, but we must remember that the teams need to be looked after. So the impact to them is huge. I've seen it before. We've had instances where you have to almost force your team out the door because they want to stay. They're committed to getting services back quickly as possible. But we just all need to remember at a time that our teams are on the end of this and they feel the pressure even if they can't do anything about it. So just wanted to pull it back to the human aspect on the team.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to conclude with. I think it is, it's some of our customers that were impacted by this. You can only imagine the stress they were going through on something that they weren't, they were getting all the pressure. They had systems down, they had patients, they had whatever it was that couldn't connect and use services, and their IT, right? It's their job to fix it. And I think you're absolutely right. I think that's stress on them and IT support and those things as well. Yeah, absolutely critical. Listen, everyone, thank you. It's been a really interesting discussion. I think I got some really great insights from that myself that that I hadn't thought about as well. So thank you as always for that. For everyone listening, thank you. I think it's been really interesting to talk about those kind of key things. Key themes I think we covered, which is good. Thank you, co-pilot, for reminding me of these things as I get to the end of the meeting. That wasn't expecting that to pop up, but thank you. Resilience and preparedness, is that a word? Preparedness apparently is a word. How can we think about those things that we necessarily hadn't thought about? Have we dropped the ball? Have we covered everything in our disaster recovery plans? That vendor reliance, what can we do to enhance that? How much do we use the vendor approach and the way they work with their partners to see what they can do to mitigate that risk as much? Do we ask those questions when we're doing technology decisions? Multi-cloud, I think that's going to be another conversation for another day, but I think definitely looking at multi-cloud, multi-vendor, multi-technology, even on premises, recovery of services onto environments that you can control. To use Matt's point about control the controllable, I think is really important. And I think one we've talked about before, but the supply chain I think becomes even more important. Understanding what our supply chain is using. Crowdstrike is a reputable company, right? It's not like Crowdstrike were a bit of a nobody. They were a reputable company. So it goes to show that it's not just the small organisations that get impacted and make mistakes. But thank you everyone for joining the call. As always, the panel, thank you so much for giving up your time on a Tuesday morning. And hope everyone enjoyed the call. We'll follow up. I think we'll share some of the notes from this. And thank you all for taking part and listening to us.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Cheers.